For 10 years, I transferred over $2,000 a month to my older sister so she could care for our elderly parents. I thought I was buying them safety. But when I drove home to surprise them, I found my father coughing up blood, their house stolen, and his garage turned into a stranger's Airbnb. My name is Eleanor Whitmore, and if you've ever trusted a family member with your life savings, I need you to listen to this very carefully before it's too late. I was 28 when I left Maple Grove with a duffel bag, $600, and a promise I made to my mother at the kitchen table. My father, Arthur, sat by the window with the same look he'd worn since the factory closed. Two people who had never once asked the world for anything. I said, "I will come back for you." My mother squeezed my hand and replied, "Do not worry about us. We have Victoria." I want you to remember that sentence. My older sister was married to Marcus Hayes, a lawyer with a handshake that could convince anyone of anything. Victoria was put in charge. I would send the money. She would manage the house, the doctors, the tax bills. For 10 years, I transferred thousands of dollars without ever asking for a receipt. I trusted her because she was my sister and because my mother said, "We have Victoria," as if that sentence were a roof and a locked front door. I went to Chicago and I never tested the roof. When I got on that Greyhound bus at 4 a.m, my father put his hand on my head and said, "Take care of your mother." That was the last sentence he ever said to me without a cough at the end of it. I thought I'd be back in 5 years. It took 10. 10 years of building an empire in Chicago, sending monthly checks and convincing myself that money was love. It wasn't. Money was just my alibi. Let me tell you what I built in Chicago. Let me tell you what it cost. And then let me show you what happened when I finally drove back to collect. I landed in Chicago with a duffel bag and a contact from a woman I had met on the bus, a designer named Linda Park, who needed an assistant and did not ask where I was from. I slept on her couch for the first 3 months. I learned fast that interior design is not about furniture. It is about listening to a person describe the life they wish they had, and then building a room that does not lie to them. It is about being told by a man in a gray suit that he wants his wife to feel like the house is hers, and then figuring out, in 2 hours, what kind of house would do that. I was good at it. I did not know why until years later, when I realized it was because I had spent my entire childhood watching my parents pretend the peeling wallpaper in the kitchen was fine. By year 2, I had my own clients. By year 4, I had a small firm. By year 6, the firm had a name on a door on Wacker Drive. Whitmore Interiors. I hired 4 people. I signed a lease. I bought a watch I still do not wear because the first time I put it on, I heard my mother say, in my head, "Eleanor, that is a lot of money for something that tells you what you already know." Every month, I transferred money. The first year, I called home every Sunday. The second year, every other Sunday. The third year, once a month. By the 5th year, Victoria was the one I called, and Margaret would pick up only sometimes, always sounding as if she had just woken up or just gone to bed, and I could never tell which. I would say, "How is Dad?" She would say, "Fine, busy." I would say, "How is the house?" She would say, "Fine, the same." I would say, "Is Mom eating?" She would say, "Eleanor, you worry too much." I would say, "I love you." She would say, "Love you too." And the line would go quiet in that specific way that meant someone else in the room had just walked in. I never asked Marcus. That was the rule we never named. Marcus handled the legal side. Marcus handled the deed. Marcus handled the property taxes. Marcus was, in my mind, the man who made sure the roof did not leak and the bank statements were filed. I did not think about him more than that. I did not want to. There is a particular kind of blindness that comes from being far away and being tired. I was working 70 hours a week. I was sending money home. I was answering my own emails and sweeping my own floor on Saturdays because the cleaning lady cost $80, and I had not yet learned that some expenses are not expenses. They are just the price of staying human. I was not ignoring my parents. I was surviving in the way that people from small towns survive in big cities, which is to say, by turning the volume down on everything that cannot fit inside a single carry-on. I should have asked. I know that now. But I want to be honest with you, because if I am not honest, the rest of this story will not teach you anything. I did not ask because I did not want to hear the answer. I did not want to hear that my father was sick. I did not want to hear that the house was falling down. I did not want to hear that my mother was sitting in a kitchen in Maple Grove, Ohio, alone, calling a daughter who would not pick up. So I sent money, and I told myself the money was the love. It was not. The money was the alibi. The money was the thing I sent in place of phone calls, in place of plane tickets, in place of the visits I kept telling myself I would make next quarter, next year, when the firm had stabilized. There was never a reason good enough. There was always a next quarter. And then, one October morning, I sold the firm. I am going to tell you that part later because it is not the part that matters. What matters is what I did with the money. I bought a house, 3 bedrooms, 1 block from the elementary school my mother used to walk me to. I had the deed put in Margaret and Arthur Whitmore. I had the utilities transferred. I packed a bag. I got in the car. I did not call ahead. I wanted the moment to be the moment. I wanted to ring the doorbell and watch my mother's face. What I did not want was the doorbell not working. The house on Linden Street was not the house I remembered. Let me describe it for you the way I saw it that morning, because the way I saw it is the way I have to live with it now. The front porch was missing 2 boards. The paint, which had been a clean colonial white the day I left, was curling off in sheets the size of my hand. The lawn, which my father had mowed every Saturday at 7 in the morning for 30 years, was chest-high in places. The gutters were full. A window on the 2nd floor was boarded up with a piece of warped plywood. I parked in the driveway. I sat there for a long moment. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that. I did not cry, because crying is what you do when you understand something, and at that moment, I did not yet understand. I was just looking at a house. Then I saw the garage. The garage had been my father's workshop. He had built me a desk in there when I was 12, a real one, with a drawer that closed properly and a little shelf for pencils. He had hung a basketball hoop above the door. He had spent Saturday afternoons in that garage for as long as I could remember. It was the only room in the house that was truly his. The garage was no longer a garage. Someone had put new siding on it. Someone had framed a small window. Someone had installed a door with a brass handle. A small wooden sign hung next to the door, painted in cursive. The sign said, Cozy Maple Cottage. A red apple, sliced open. Below the apple, a phone number, and below the phone number, a row of star ratings. Someone had turned my father's workshop into an Airbnb. I got out of the car. My legs were slow, the way legs get when the brain is trying to keep up. I walked up the path. I rang the doorbell. Nothing. I knocked. I heard footsteps, slow, uneven. The door opened. My father was thinner than I remembered. His glasses sat lower on his nose. He had a blanket around his shoulders, even though the morning was not cold. He coughed once, low, wet, the kind of cough that does not finish. He looked at me for 3 full seconds. Then he said, Eleanor. Then he said, You came. I said, I came. He stepped aside. I walked in. The hallway smelled different. The wallpaper was the same, but it had water damage near the ceiling. A strip of carpet had been pulled up and not replaced. There were boxes in the corner that had not been there 10 years ago. I heard my mother before I saw her. She was in the kitchen. She was talking to someone on the phone. Her voice was low, and it had the specific shape of a person who is trying to make a small problem sound like no problem at all. She hung up when she saw me. She put the phone face down on the counter. She smiled. I will never forget that smile because it was the smile of a woman who had been rehearsing it for a very long time. She said, Eleanor, oh my girl! I hugged her. She was lighter than I remembered. Her hair was pinned back with a clip I did not recognize. Her housecoat had a stain near the collar that she had tried to scrub out and failed. I said, Mom. I said, what is going on? She said, What do you mean nothing is going on? You're here. Sit down. I will make tea. I did not sit down. I looked at the kitchen. The refrigerator was humming too loud, the way refrigerators hum when the seal is failing. The window above the sink had a crack running through it. There was a notebook on the counter, a small spiral one, and I could see, from where I stood, that the pages were covered in handwriting. My mother's handwriting. Small, pressed hard, many lines on each page. My mother saw me see the notebook. She moved her hand over it, the way you cover a card in a card game, and she slid it into a drawer. She said, You must be tired from the drive. I will make the tea. My father coughed again from the hallway. My mother did not turn around. Something was wrong. I want you to understand that, at this point, I still did not know what. I just knew that the house was not the house. My mother was not my mother. My father's cough was a thing that lived in his chest. And a notebook with my mother's handwriting was being hidden in a kitchen drawer. I will tell you what was in that notebook. I will tell you what was in the medicine cabinet. I will tell you what the new siding on the garage was hiding. But I need you to wait with me for a moment because this is the part of the story where most people would have turned around and driven back to Chicago. I did not turn around. I stayed. I made the tea myself because my mother was not going to make it. I sat at the kitchen table and I asked my mother to sit with me. She sat. My father came in and sat down, and he coughed again. And this time my mother looked at him, and I saw in that look the first honest thing I had seen on her face since I walked in. She was afraid. Not of me, not of the moment. She was afraid of something that had been happening for a long time, and she had been carrying it alone. If you're still here, drop a comment and tell me. What would you have done in that kitchen on that morning with that notebook and that cough and that smile? I did not confront my mother that first day. I want to be clear about that. I want to be honest about the order in which I learned things because the order is what made the truth feel the way it did. The first thing I noticed was the medicine cabinet. I had asked my father if he was taking anything for the cough. He had said no. I went into the bathroom on the first floor, the small one with the chipped tile I had chipped myself when I was 9. The cabinet was above the sink. I opened it. There was one bottle of cough syrup. It was almost empty. The label had been cut. The dosage instructions had been cut. The brand name had been cut. I held the bottle up to the light. The liquid inside was the color of weak tea, not the deep amber of a real cough suppressant. Someone had refilled it with something watered down, and they had cut the label to remove the proof. I put the bottle down. I did not say anything to my father. I went to the kitchen and I opened the drawer where my mother had hidden the notebook. The notebook was a small spiral, the kind you buy at a dollar store. The first page had a date from 2 years ago. The second page had a list of names. The third page had phone numbers with check marks next to some and small X marks next to others. I turned the page. The list continued. I counted. 47 phone calls over a span of 23 months that someone had made to someone else and had not been answered. 47. I knew because I counted, and I am not a person who makes that number up. The names were doctors, the phone numbers were clinics, the X marks meant no one had called back. The check marks meant the call had connected and the result had been a no. My mother had been calling for help, and the help had not been returning her calls. I sat down at the kitchen table. I read the notebook a second time. I closed it. I put it back in the drawer, then I went outside and I looked at the garage again. The sign said Cozy Maple Cottage. The window was clean. The door handle was polished. I walked around the back. There was a small deck with 2 chairs and a metal table. There was a planter with artificial flowers. There was a chime made of seashells. It was the kind of place that someone had built to make a guest feel welcome. My father had built me a desk in that garage. The concrete floor was the same. The light fixture was the same. The walls had been drywalled over the old pegboard, and the pegboard was still visible in one corner where my father had hung a tape measure and a level that he had bought with his own money. The level was still there. I touched it. It was cold. I went back inside. I sat at the kitchen table. My mother came in. I said, "Mom." I said, "The garage." She said, "Victoria needed the income." She said it the way you say something you have said to yourself 1,000 times, in a voice that has been worn smooth by repetition. I said, "Dad used that garage every day." She said, "I know." I said, "And you let her." She said, "I did not let her. She did it. Your father said no, and she did it anyway." I asked, "What about the medicine?" She looked at me. She did not ask which medicine. She knew which one I meant. She said, "The pharmacy stopped delivering." She said, "Victoria said it was the insurance." She said, "I did not push." I said, "For how long?" She said, "A while." I said, "How long is a while?" She said, "Since last winter." I closed my eyes. I opened them. I said, "And the phone calls." She did not ask which phone calls. She put her hand on the notebook, even though it was back in the drawer, as if she could feel it through the wood. She said, "I was trying to get a specialist in Columbus." She said, "The wait is long." She said, "They keep saying they will call back." I said, "And the bills?" She said, "Victoria handles the bills." I said, "Show me one." She did not move. I want to pause here, because I want you to understand what I was feeling. I was not angry yet. I was not angry because anger requires you to know who is responsible. And at that moment, I was only beginning to know. I was feeling something quieter. I was feeling the specific, terrible weight of understanding that the people you love have been suffering in a room you have not entered, and that you, in your monthly transfers, in your careful blindness, have been paying the salary of the person who is hurting them. If this story is making you feel something, leave a like. It helps more than you know. I left my parents' house that evening. I told them I was going to a hotel. I told them I would come back the next morning. My mother wanted me to stay in my old room. I said no, and the reason I said no is because my old room had a padlock on the outside of the door. I did not say that to her. I drove to a motel 6 miles away. I sat on the bed. I made a list on a piece of motel stationery in handwriting that was not as steady as I would have liked. The list had 2 names, my sister, my brother-in-law, and a question I was not yet ready to ask out loud. The next morning, I drove to Marcus Hayes' law office on Main Street. It was a brick building with brass numbers on the door. There was a waiting room with leather chairs and a small water feature. There was a framed photograph of Marcus shaking hands with a state senator. There was a sign on the wall that said, "Your future is our priority." I sat down. I waited. Marcus came out himself. He was wearing a navy suit. His hair had gone gray at the temples in a way that made him look, I thought, more confident than he had any right to be. He saw me and his smile did the thing that smiles do when a person has been expecting a different visitor. He said, "Eleanor, what a surprise," he said. "Please come in." He said, "The whole family is going to be so happy you're home." I went into his office. I sat in the chair across from his desk. I put my hands on my knees. I looked at him. He sat down. He adjusted his tie. His hands were sweating. I want you to remember that. His hands were sweating, and we had not yet begun. I said, "Marcus." I said, "How long have you been with Victoria?" He said, "Since you left." He said it too quickly. He tried to recover. He said, "I mean, we have been married since before that, you know that." I said, "I know when you got married. I am asking how long you have been with her while doing what you have been doing with my parents' money." He did not answer. I said, "I want to see the books." I said, "I want to see the deed. I want to see every transfer from the joint account." He said, "Eleanor, you have to understand, your parents wanted a certain lifestyle." He said, "Your father had medical bills. The property needed maintenance." I said, "The property had a garage with new siding and a sign that says Cozy Maple Cottage." He blinked. I said, "The medicine in the cabinet has been cut with water." He looked at the window. I said, "The medicine, Marcus." He said, "I did not handle the medicine. That was Victoria. I handled the legal side, the deed, the taxes, the filings." I said, "What deed, Marcus?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, in a voice that had gone flat, that there had been a transfer. He said it was a refinancing. He said it was a way to handle the medical debt. He said my mother had agreed. I said, "My mother did not sign anything. My mother cannot spell her own name without her reading glasses, and she would not have signed a refinancing without calling me." Marcus looked at the desk. He did not look up. I said, "Whose signature is on the deed, Marcus?" He said, "I cannot discuss a client's documents with another client." I said, "I am not another client. I am their daughter." He said, "Eleanor, please, this is more complicated than you think." I said, "Then uncomplicate it." He sat there. His tie was not as straight as it had been. He took out a handkerchief and wiped his palms. He folded it. He folded it again. Then he said, in a very small voice, that he had been afraid. He said, Victoria had found out about a woman. He said, a client. He said it had been a mistake once, and Victoria had found the messages, and Victoria had told him at his own desk that if he did not help her, she would send the messages to his partners and to the state bar. He said, "I have a daughter in college." I said, "You have a daughter in college, and you let my father go without medicine." He put his face in his hands. I want you to understand what I was feeling in that office. I was not feeling anger. Anger is a clean word. I was feeling the specific, nauseating weight of understanding that a man I had trusted with the legal side of my parents' life had been blackmailed into a conspiracy to rob them, and that the conspiracy had lasted long enough for the roof to fall in and the medicine to be cut with water and the garage to be turned into a rental. I want you to also understand, and I say this carefully, that I do not believe in forgiving people who choose to do harm because they are afraid. I have sent money home for 10 years because I was afraid of what I would find. But there is a line. Marcus crossed it the day he signed a document that transferred my parents' house into my sister's name, and he kept crossing it every month for years. He chose his reputation over my parents' medicine. He chose his marriage over my father's cough. Marcus, in that office, with his face in his hands, told me where the deed was. He told me it had been kept in a safe place. He told me, because he needed to be the one who told me, that the signature was not my mother's. He did not say the word forged. He did not have to. I stood up. I walked out of the office. I did not say goodbye. Stay with me, because the next chapter is the one that broke me open. The deed was in the Bible. I need you to hear that sentence again. The deed to my parents' house, the document that transferred ownership from Margaret and Arthur Whitmore to Victoria Whitmore Hayes, was hidden inside a Bible, in the drawer of the nightstand next to my mother's bed. I went back to the house. My parents were in the kitchen. I told my mother I needed to go into her room. I told her I needed to look in the nightstand. She followed me. She stood in the doorway while I opened the drawer. She did not try to stop me. The Bible was a King James with a black cover that had been wrapped in clear tape at some point in its life. My mother had received it from her own mother. I had written my name in the front of it when I was 11, in pencil, in a hand that had not yet learned to slant. I opened it to the page where it falls open on its own, the way Bibles do, the page that has been pressed the most. There was a folded piece of paper inside. I unfolded it. It was a warranty deed. It was a county form, the kind that you can get from any recorder's office. The transfer date was 4 years ago. The grantors were listed as Margaret E. Whitmore and Arthur J. Whitmore. The grantee was Victoria R. Whitmore Hayes. The signature line from my mother said, Margaret E. Whitmore. The signature line from my father said, Arthur J. Whitmore. The notary acknowledgement was signed by a woman I did not recognize. I looked at the signature. I have seen my mother sign her name 10,000 times. She signs with a particular loop on the G, a small tail on the R, a final E that does not close. The signature on the deed had all the right letters in all the right order, but the G was a closed loop, the R was straight, and the final E closed. It was close enough to fool a notary who was not paying attention. It was not close enough to fool a daughter. I looked at my mother's signature and I knew that someone had practiced it. Someone had sat at a kitchen table in this house with a pen and a piece of paper and had written my mother's name over and over until they had gotten it almost right. My mother was standing in the doorway. She was not crying. She was holding onto the door frame with both hands, the way a person holds on when the floor is moving. I said, Mom? She said, I did not sign that. I said, I know. She said, I would never sign that. I said, I know, Mom. She said, Eleanor, I did not sign that paper. I sat down on the edge of her bed. I held the deed in my hand. I said, I know you did not. I said, we are going to fix this. I said, I am not leaving until we fix this. My mother did not move from the doorway for a long time. Then she let go of the door frame, and she walked across the room and she sat down next to me, and she did not say anything else, because there was nothing else to say. We sat on the edge of her bed, in a room that smelled like the same lavender she had used since I was a child, and we held a piece of paper that proved, in black and white, that her daughter had tried to take her house. I want to pause here. I was not crying. I had not cried since I got to Maple Grove. Crying in that moment would have been a luxury. The job was to find out what the forged deed had been used for, and to find out how to undo it. I went to the county recorder's website on my phone. I pulled up the parcel number. The property was no longer in my parents' name. There had been a refinance in year 2 that had pulled $70,000 out of the property. The monthly payment was being made from the joint account I had been funding. The Airbnb income was being deposited into Victoria's name. I put the phone down. I looked at my mother. She had her hand on the Bible on the place where the deed had been. She was smoothing the page with her thumb, the way you smooth a page that is the only proof you have. I said, When is Victoria coming? My mother said, She comes on Fridays. She said, She likes to do the inspection. I said, The property that is in her name. My mother did not answer. I said, What day is it? My mother said, Wednesday. I said, Then we have 2 days. I want to stop here for a second and ask you something. If you had found a document like that in a Bible in your mother's bedroom in a house you had been paying to maintain for a decade, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. I read them and I want to know what you would have done. What I did in the end was wait. Victoria came on Friday at 11 in the morning in a cream-colored sedan that she had not had 4 years ago, with a leather handbag that I knew cost more than a month of my parents' medicine. She had a key. She let herself in. She called out, Mom, I'm here for the walkthrough. I was sitting at the kitchen table. I was alone. I had sent my parents to a neighbor's house. I had told my mother I would handle it. I had told my father to take his cough syrup. I had not told them what I was going to do. I did not want them in the room for what was about to happen. Victoria came into the kitchen. She stopped when she saw me. She did a thing with her face that I have seen her do since we were children, a quick rearrangement, a smile put on like a coat, before the body has decided what it actually feels. She said, Eleanor. She said, You are here. She said, No one told me. I said, No one tells you anything, do they? She did not sit down. She put her handbag on the counter. She moved toward the refrigerator. She said, Can I get you something? She said, I have a bottle of water in the car. She said, Mom usually keeps lemonade, but I can run out. I said, Sit down, Victoria. She did not sit down. She said, Eleanor, I have an inspection at noon. I am a little pressed for time. I said, sit down. She sat down. She put her hands on the table, the way you put your hands on a table when you want people to see that they are steady. I said, I have the deed. She blinked. I said, the warranty deed. The one that is not in Mom and Dad's name anymore. The one that is in your name. The one that was signed in a handwriting that is not Mom's. She said, Eleanor, I do not know what you are talking about. I said, the one that was hidden in Mom's Bible. The one that Marcus helped you file. The one that pulled $70,000 out of this house. She said, that is not true. I said, I have read the county records, Victoria. I have read the loan documents. I have read the Airbnb income. I have read the joint account statements. I have read the pharmacy receipts. I have read the notebook with the 47 phone calls that did not get returned. She was not smiling anymore. She said in a voice that was very quiet that she had done what she had to do. She said this family would have lost the house if she had not stepped in. She said Dad's medical bills were enormous. She said the roof was failing. She said she had put in her own money in the beginning before I started sending anything, and no one had ever thanked her. I said, and so you took the house. She said, I did not take the house. I protected the house. I kept the house in the family. I said, in your name. She said, it is still in the family. I said, whose name is on the deed, Victoria? She did not answer. She said, Eleanor, you have always been the one who leaves. You have always been the one who sends money and then disappears. You have never been here. You have never had to sit with Dad in the air. You have never had to drive Mom to the pharmacy. You do not get to come back after 10 years and act like you know what this family needed. I let her finish. I did not interrupt because I wanted her to say every word, because every word she said was another piece of the picture. Then I heard footsteps in the hallway. My father had come back from the neighbor's house. He was standing in the kitchen doorway with his blanket around his shoulders, and he was looking at his eldest daughter with a face I had not seen on him before. It was the face of a man who had been quiet for a long time and was about to be quiet no longer. He coughed. He took a breath. He said in a voice that did not waver, the only sentence he had been saving for 10 years. Loving someone and stealing from them do not go together. He said it once. He did not say it again. He did not need to. Victoria looked at him. She looked at me. She opened her mouth. She closed it. She picked up her handbag from the counter. She walked to the door. She did not say goodbye. The door closed. The car started. The sound of the engine went down the driveway, and then it was quiet. My father coughed. I gave him a glass of water. He drank it. He sat down at the kitchen table, in the same chair he had been sitting in for 30 years, and he put both hands flat on the table, and he did not say anything else. There was nothing else to say. I want you to stay with me, because there is one more piece. The piece that changed everything. Marcus called me on Sunday. I want to be careful about how I tell you this, because I want you to understand that I did not ask him to call. I did not want him to call. I wanted the law to do what the law was supposed to do, and I had already contacted a real estate attorney in Columbus, and the deed fraud was being investigated. I did not need Marcus. What I needed was for Marcus to be quiet. Marcus was not quiet. He called because Victoria had gone to his office that Saturday, and she had screamed at him for 45 minutes in a room with a glass door, and his partners had heard every word, and his secretary had quietly closed the door and called the Bar Association's ethics hotline. And by Sunday morning, Marcus was facing a choice that he had been avoiding for 4 years. He chose himself. Of course he chose himself. That is what Marcus had been doing the whole time. That is what I want to be clear about, because there will be people who watch this and think that Marcus redeemed himself by signing the affidavit. He did not redeem himself. He chose, for the first time in 4 years, the version of himself that did not have to go to prison. He chose his license over my parents' medicine. He chose his family over my father's cough. He had been choosing himself the entire time. The affidavit was not redemption. The affidavit was the only option he had left. He called me, and he said, in a voice that I haven't heard from another adult man before or since, that he was going to sign an affidavit. He said he was going to sign a document that said, in his own handwriting, that the signature on the warranty deed was not my mother's. He said he was going to name Victoria. He said he was going to attach the practice sheets he had seen in a manila folder in a box labeled Christmas. He said, I cannot go to prison, Eleanor. I said, you should not have helped her. He said, I know. I said, then sign it. He said, I will. He said, Eleanor, he said, your father's a good man. He said, "I have not been a good man." I said, "Then sign it." He signed it on Monday. The affidavit went to the county prosecutor on Tuesday. The warrant was issued on Wednesday. Victoria was arrested on Thursday at the Airbnb while she was setting up a welcome basket for a guest who had booked a long weekend. I want you to know that because I want you to know that the welcome basket was for a guest who was going to sleep in my father's workshop. And Victoria was setting it up with both hands, the way she had set up every other thing in our family's life, with the appearance of care and the reality of theft. The deed was reversed, the property went back into my parents' names, the loan was renegotiated, the Airbnb sign came down, the garage, eventually, was returned to what it had been. The pegboard went back on the wall, the level stayed in the corner, my father's basketball hoop went back above the door. I want to tell you what I did not do. I did not write a public post, I did not give an interview, I did not put it on social media, I did not write a letter to the editor. I did not need the world to know what Victoria had done, because the people who needed to know already knew, and the people who did not know were not going to change anything by finding out. I did, however, make a phone call. I called my mother. I said, "Mom, the house is in your name again," she said. "Are you sure?" I said, "I am sure." She said, "Eleanor," I said, "Mom." She said, "Come get us." That was the sentence I had been waiting 10 years to hear her say. I went to the house, I packed 2 suitcases, I left everything else. I did not sort through drawers, I did not pick through the kitchen. I left the photos on the wall. I left the small rug my father had bought for my mother the Christmas I was 9. I left the kettle on the stove. The only things I packed were clothes, the Bible with the empty fold in the page where the deed had been, and the notebook with the 47 phone calls, which my mother had given me without a word, the way you hand over a piece of evidence. I put my parents in the car. My father sat in the front seat. My mother sat in the back. I drove them out of Maple Grove at 4 a.m, the same hour I had left 10 years before, and the sky was the same color it had been then, and the road was the same road, and the only thing that was different was that I was not alone, and neither were they. We are almost at the end. Stay with me. My parents lived with me in Chicago for the first 3 months. They had the guest room and the small den. My father got a pulmonologist at Northwestern. My mother got a cardiologist. The cough got better. The color came back into her face. She started cooking again, the way she used to with the radio on, and the kitchen smelled like onions and celery and the particular warmth of a woman who had been allowed for the first time in a long time to take care of someone who was not hiding from her. I want to tell you about the morning the idea came to me, because it did not come from a business plan. It came from a small moment, the kind that does not feel important at the time. It was a Sunday in January. My father was sitting at the kitchen table. He had a mug of coffee in his hand. He was looking out the window at Lake Michigan, which he had never seen before he came to Chicago. And he said, in a voice that was not meant for me, but that I heard anyway, that he missed the sound of the house. I said, "What sound, Dad?" He said, "The creak, the one in the hallway, the one your mother always said we were going to fix." I said, "I can build you a creek." He looked at me. He laughed. It was the first time I had heard him laugh in a very long time. I started sketching that night. I started with a floor plan. I started with a courtyard because my mother liked to sit outside in the morning. I started with a garden because my father had never lost the habit of checking on things that grow. I started with a dining room that was big enough for 10 people because I wanted my parents to have a place where people came to them instead of a place where they were left alone. I called an architect I trusted. I called a contractor I had worked with for years. I told them what I wanted. I told them the name was not a marketing decision. I told them the name was the only thing I had not been able to buy my parents, which was a place that was built for them and named after them and run by people who would treat them the way I should have been treating them for 10 years. The house opened in the spring, 11 months after I brought my parents to Chicago. It is called Arthur and Margaret House. It has 28 rooms. It has a garden courtyard with a path that my father designed himself. It has a small workshop in the back with a pegboard and a level and a basketball hoop above the door. It has a kitchen that smells every morning like onions and celery in the radio. I want to be honest with you about one thing before I close this story. I have not forgiven Victoria. I do not want you to think this is a story about forgiveness. It is a story about what you do when the people who are supposed to protect you become the people you have to be protected from. It is a story about what you do when you find a Bible in your mother's drawer and a deed in a Bible and a signature that is not your mother's. It is a story about what you do when the person you trusted most tells you, in a very small voice, that he was afraid, and you realize in that moment that being afraid is not an explanation. It is a confession. My parents are okay. My father still coughs, sometimes in the morning. My mother still hides things in drawers, but now they are photographs and letters. I sold the firm. I do not regret it. I am not, by the standards of the world I left in Chicago, a wealthy woman anymore. I am, by the standards of the world I am building now, exactly wealthy enough. Thank you for staying with me through this one. If this story made you feel something, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for the next one. Drop a comment and tell me what you would have done in the kitchen that morning, or at the law office, or at the door when the Bible came open. I read every comment, and I want to hear from you. Take care of the people who raised you. Do it now. Not when you have built the business, not when you have saved enough, not when the timing is right. Do it now, because the roof is failing in a house you have not visited, and the medicine is being cut with water, and the notebook with the 47 phone calls is sitting in a drawer that no one is opening. I am Eleanor Whitmore. I will see you in the next one. Good night.